What's happening, guys? We're back and we're doing more fiberglass again. All right, guys, so we got the smart car out. That was a fun little project, bit of a distraction from our main focus, but we're back at it. We're back doing fiberglass. It's cold outside now, so this is the worst time to be doing fiberglass work, but it's how it lines up. So today, or this episode, because it's gonna be more than one day, my thoughts are we're gonna do all of the reinforcement to that new hood that we cast 2 episodes ago. We're gonna do the reinforcement to that. We also have some, we had some issues on the nose cone area, and it turned out really kind of terrible. So I took some time and cast another nose cone insert. So just this section, I don't know if you guys can figure out what that is. That's just the inner portion of that nose cone. So I did that just with the plug for the front of the hood mold. That way it was a lot easier to kind of get into the nooks and crannies on it. It was a lot easier to roll out any excess resin and make a good part. So we're going to take and cut that section out of our hood, and we're going to bond that in instead and then reinforce it that way. So I've never done that, making, you know, 2 pieces into one, but we're gonna learn it. So we're gonna take the hood out, stick it back in the mold, cut that section out, and then trim the 2 pieces so that they fit really nice, put the mold back together again so it holds it all in the right orientation, and then get in there and lay in some glass. And then we're gonna do I'll show you guys when we do it, but we're gonna use some backing rod to make some inner ribs in the hood, cast those. And then I've also been working on the fenders quite a bit. So if you guys remember the fender mold from a while ago, I've actually been pulling bicycle fenders out of that mold and getting that figured out. These are turning out really nice, so I'm pretty pumped about that. I'll show you guys the process maybe if I have some footage. If not, well, we'll just have to, it's the same process, it's just laying in fiberglass. But because this mold for the fender is quite a bit smaller and easier to get into, these are turning out way easier. I'm able to use the mat properly, or the weave properly, I should say, getting my bias plies and everything in there. So these are turning out really good. I'm pumped about those. I'm gonna cast a whole bunch of these fenders so that we can kind of experiment and play a little bit. And I also want to have a few of these in stock because I get the impression that those front fenders, I might lose a few of those going down the highway, catching a rock or whatever. So that's coming really good. I'm doing all that off camera though. It just takes way too much time to show you guys what we're doing on that. And it's pretty boring. It's just laying glass into a mold. But yeah, so let's pop the hood off, get it set in the mold. We'll trace out a line and we'll figure out how we're gonna make this, this nose cone work. Let's get after it.
Well, the hood looks great on the car. I want to put it back into the mold for the fiberglassing so that it retains its shape. It's also just way easier to hold it securely when we're cutting and grinding on it. The first step was getting the old nose cone section cut out. A quick freehand line on the center-ish of the front face was a good cutting guide. Doesn't have to be super accurate for this step because I'm going to trim the second piece to match with whatever line you draw. I find that a grinder with a zip disc is the fastest way to cut the fiberglass. It makes a huge mess, but it doesn't chip the resin and it makes pretty quick work of straight lines. A jigsaw is used for the corners, but I got to go pretty slow to prevent that chipping out of the resin on the top side. I wanted the edges of the 2 parts feathered out to a knife edge so that there wouldn't be any air pocket issues, and a flap disc worked really good here. It takes material off super fast though, so you got to be pretty careful to avoid grinding it back and making a hole that you got to fill later. With the new part stuck on the nose mold section, I bolted the mold back together again to keep everything in the correct position. Well, and then I flipped the mold up on its nose to make the glassing process a lot easier. For bonding these two parts together, I used one layer of 2-ounce chop strand mat covered with like 3 to 4 layers of the woven fabric. The matting helps to fill up any imperfections and build a bit of bulk, while the fabric gives a lot of strength without adding much weight. The biggest learning I have from my fiberglass work is to spend lots of time packing the layers together and removing as much resin as possible. The resin helps add rigidity, but next to zero actual strength while being really heavy. So getting as much of that out as possible while still having the fibers wetted out is a key step. With that done, we can lay the mold back down and start prepping for the reinforcement. Quick lick with the orbital sander knocks off any of the oils and the wax while giving a good tooth for the new resin to bond to. We're using 3/4 inch backer rod to get the shape of our ribs patterned out, and I just used a hot glue gun to tack it down to the hood. This joint doesn't have to be super strong, it's just holding that rod in the right position. The glue and the foam won't add any strength, so it can be a pretty haphazard product, but after an hour of gluing and a really sore trigger finger, it's starting to look like something. I went ahead and tossed some glass over the foam, starting with some chop strand and then a few layers of the fabric to smooth everything out. Same theory here as with the nose cone. The chop strand adds a bit of bulk and helps to fill in the imperfections in the foam, and then the fabric makes a nice smooth layer on the top and adds a whole bunch of strength. I had to work in sections for this because there's a lot of nooks and crannies, and packing everything out took a long time. I didn't want my resin to gel up before I was done working with the glass. Well, that cured up, I was able to pop that nose cone mold off and see the joint from the front side. Then a few more layers over those foam ribs, working my way around, making sure every rib had enough material to give it rigidity, while trying to keep the weight down as much as possible. When you're working with such small areas, it's pretty easy to get carried away and keep adding layers to use up the resin you mixed. And there's definitely a few areas that are quite a bit thicker than they needed to be.
All right, we got the reinforcement all done. That's looking pretty good. I went over it a couple times off camera and just laid a little bit more glass in there. It's not perfect. There's quite a bit of delamination because we're asking the fiberglass to make a pretty sharp bend, and I don't have time to sit out here until everything gels up really good and then go through and make it nice, but I think it'll work just fine. It also doesn't have to be real pretty because it's on the underside of the hood. Who's gonna see it? We are gonna go through and do a little bit of sanding on it just to make sure there's none of the kind of the pokey edges where there's like a stray piece of fiberglass that's gonna poke you and rip your clothes and stuff. So we'll sand that up a little bit, but that's good enough. I also laid a little bit of reinforcement on the nose cone on the outside where we bonded those two pieces together. That's gonna need a whole bunch of sanding and probably some Bondo. I know you guys hate Bondo, but it's part of building a fiberglass car. There's gonna be some filler. So we're gonna leave that the way it is and we'll deal with that at a later date. Before we can get rid of this hood mold though, there's one more thing we gotta do, and that's we need to put a flange on the nose cone. So because we build them as one piece and then we cut them apart, we end up with just a butt joint. And if you have a butt joint, it's really hard to keep it level essentially. So what we're gonna do is cut the hood and the nose cone apart. We're gonna put them back in the mold, and then we're going to lay a flange. We're gonna attempt, this is my first time doing it, so fingers crossed. We're gonna attempt to lay a flange on the back side of the nose cone that'll give the hood something to rest up against. So we're kind of doing this live, but we'll figure it out.
In order to make that flange, the first step was to get the hood out of the mold. There was a little bit of resin seep through that tacked the hood to the mold, but even with the unprepped mold, it popped free pretty easy with just a few screwdrivers. Because we took the time to tape that wire into the mold before casting it, there was a nice line molded right into the fiberglass to follow with the grinder, making cutting the nose off a breeze. It was still super dusty, but at least we didn't have to pull out the laser lines. Then a quick sand with the orbital to smooth down any bumps on the hood side and remove any of that PVA residue from the nose cone and give that flange resin a good roughed up surface to bond to. For situations like this where I want to keep the new resin from bonding to the hood side, I find the quickest way to create a non-stick surface is just using packing tape. It's cheap, easy to find, and really easy to work around the corners just by using a whole bunch of little pieces. And because it's flexible and slippery already, I don't need to do any waxing or prep work before laying the glass over it. Just make sure there's no holes for the resin to seep through and tack it to the other side. Then it's just rinse and repeat. Layer chop strand to fill any voids and imperfections, and a few layers of weave over top to smooth out the final surface. I like to add my weave alternating in layers between 90 degrees fibers and 45 degree fibers, just to give the part strength in all directions. This may be a bit overkill for just a flange, but it's a process I've settled on now, and I'm far too old to change my ways now.
I mixed that batch of resin a little hot. It actually started kicking off on me as we were rolling it out, so I had to hurry pretty quick to get everything done. I think it's fine. We might be a little thick on resin, but it is what it is. It'll be just fine. The last step you guys saw me do there was I sprayed the resin with PVA. Same stuff we used for our mold release. The polyester resin that we use doesn't fully cure in air, so you have to seal it. You can buy a waxed resin, so it has a little bit of wax in it, and then as it cures, the wax floats to the top, makes kind of a protective candy shell, and then it allows all the resin to cure underneath it and gives you like a nice hard surface. I run unwaxed resin so that I can come in later and make modifications and, you know, add pieces, do all the stuff that we've been doing here. But because of that, if I don't seal it somehow, it leaves kind of a tacky surface, which is fine. You can work with it, you can sand that off and whatnot, but it gums up sandpaper and it's kind of a pain in the butt. So I just spray it with PVA when I know I'm done, and then that seals it, and then I can wash it off with water and scuff it up and add to it later if I want to. So that's what I did on that part to make sure that that cures up. So with that all done, I think we're done all the fiberglass work. I gotta pop that out and trim it and whatnot, but that's busy work, so I'll do that off camera. And then I can pack up all of this itchy fiberglass stuff, put it in storage, and we can actually get after doing something a little more fun, like anything. Anything's more fun than fiberglass. I'm tired of it. I'm sure you guys are tired of it too. We got a bunch of stuff to put on the car. We got a bunch of exciting new parts to put on the car. And then we got a bunch of fabrication yet to do on the car too. So weather's getting a little colder. It's gonna be impossible to do any work with the door open or the windows open anymore. So it's a good time to be done with fiberglass. So thank you so much for watching, you guys. If you haven't already, hit the like and subscribe button. I think it adds to my algorithm views. I have no idea how YouTube works, but it's what everybody else asks you to do, so what the hell. Anyhow, I'm out of here.